Hello, third grade. This is Mrs. Burrows. I would like to invite you to join me for we are talking about April 22nd's lesson. We are going to be talking about lesson 103, describing triangles, with the homework lesson 19.4. Okay, let me get this back in focus for everybody. And there we go. Okay, very good. All right, let me roll around over here. And first of all, I'm going to start by saying, welcome to my home office. This is the office in my house. Second of all, I miss you guys a lot. This is very hard. I'm hoping to get a chance to see your faces before the end of the year and keep my fingers crossed. Okay, before we start today, you're going to need some things. First of all, you're going to need a pencil. Make sure you have a pencil. Second thing you're going to need out, I would like you to find your work packet that we put together for you. In your work packet, I would like you to go and look through. I would like you to find lesson 103. It's called lesson 103, describing triangles. You're also going to need to have that ready to go. The last thing that you're going to need to have for me today is a piece of paper. Doesn't matter if it's a graph paper, computer paper, line paper, doesn't matter. You just have to have a paper that has a corner on it that we can use today. We'll talk about why we need that later. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Before we get moving today, I do want to review a little bit because we are going to be talking about triangles, but I want to make sure we understand what the angles look like first. First things first, we have a right angle, and if you guys remember, an angle is something that is made up with two rays on it with a similar endpoint. Now, let's take a look at this one first. First angle I want to talk about is a right angle. Now, most math people will put a little tiny square here in the corner to show that it's a right angle. A right angle is a perfect corner. Now, sometimes they don't put that little mark in there, and sometimes it's kind of hard to tell if it's a right angle or not. But I'm going to show you a really easy way to tell if it's a right angle or not. Find that paper I talked about earlier. Find one of the corners. If you can stick the corner of a paper right in there in the corner and it fits perfectly, you have a right angle. See how the rays go up to make a perfect corner right there? You have a right angle. Now, we also have another type, two types of angles here. We also have this one, which we call an obtuse angle. And let's take a look at that. We had the right angle that made the perfect corner. This one doesn't look like it makes such a perfect corner. It doesn't. This ray follows the bottom, but this one's bigger. It's actually bigger than a right angle. Because it's bigger, we call it an obtuse angle. It's obtuse. The third angle that you probably have talked about is this one. Now I notice the two rays here are a little bit closer together. When I put my paper in there, yep, the bottom ray matches, but this one is much smaller than a right angle. It's a cute angle. It's small. It's a cute little angle. So we have the right angle that makes a perfect corner, the obtuse angle that's bigger than a right angle, and we have the acute angle, which is smaller than the obtuse and the right angle. Okay, there's a reason why I needed to talk about those today, because we're going to talk about naming triangles today. Now, before we even get started, I'm going to let you guys know that when we name a triangle actually has three names. The first name is going to be what kind of angle you find in that triangle. And I always start with A, angle goes first. And then we have what kind of sides does that triangle have. And the third name's pretty easy. All triangles are called a triangle for their last name. And if you really think about it, tri means three, angle. A triangle has three angles in it. Okay, let's go ahead and start looking at the different types of triangles we have and learning how to name them. I'm going to show you another page here with some different triangles on it, and I'd like to talk about how those work together. Okay, first one. Let's take a look at this. This triangle right here, I would like to look at it. I notice, because it is a triangle, it has three angles in it, I notice it's got three different angles. This little angle right here, that looks like an acute angle to me. So does this one, but look at this guy right here. I want to check that guy. That kind of looks like a right triangle to me, a right angle. So let's see if it is. Oh, yep, I see a right angle right there. Sometimes the math people or math books are not going to put the little square there to let you know that it is a right triangle or a right angle. So I'm going to put it in there now. This triangle has one right angle in it, so we're going to call this whole thing a right triangle because it does have a right angle. Okay, second type of triangle. Let's take a look at it. Now I'm just looking, but I have a feeling that this angle and this angle, remember it's a triangle, it has 3 angles. This angle and this angle look pretty small. I think those are acute. But let's look at this one here. I think this angle looks pretty big. I want to see if it's bigger than a right angle. It is. That's an obtuse angle. Because it has one obtuse angle in it, we are going to call this triangle an obtuse triangle. Even though it has acute angles, it does have one obtuse angle, so we're going to call it an obtuse triangle. Okay, the last one over here. All of these little angles, because it's a triangle, they all look pretty small to me. I don't think any of these are a right angle or an obtuse angle. Nope, I'm right, that's pretty small. All 3 of those angles in that triangle are acute. So we have an acute triangle. So, right triangle, you have one right angle. An obtuse triangle, you have one obtuse angle that's bigger than a right angle. And an acute triangle, you have 3 angles in there that are all acute angles. Okay, so our first name for our triangle is going to be what kind of angle you find. Is it a right, an obtuse, or an acute triangle? All right, now let's look at the second name that you're going to give to your triangle. The second name has to do with what kind of sides you have. I'm going to put this up here so we can remember. Now, this is where we get into some interesting vocabulary words, 3rd grade, so let's make sure we're listening to these. We already know the right, obtuse, and acute, but these are some other words that we haven't learned yet, so I really want you guys to listen to how these words are said and how you can remember which one is which. Okay, first name for the triangle is going to be what kind of angle it has. We've talked about those. Second name for the triangle is going to be what kind of sides does it have. Okay, now when I talk about a side, I'm talking about from one end point of a line segment to the other end point, from one end point to the other end point. A triangle is going to have 3 line segments in it. We're going to look at each of those line segments, each side of the triangle, to decide what kind of triangle it is. Now let's look at this one. I can see that this line segment is much bigger than this one. This one is smaller. None of these line segments look like they're the same length. If I'm really not sure, I can grab my ruler and I can check it out. Let's see. This one was 7 inches, about 7 inches. This one was about 6. That one's only about 3. So none of those are the same length. All of the sides are different. So this has no equal sides. We call this a triangle with no equal sides a scalene triangle. Okay, they all have different lengths. So that is a scalene triangle. Now I'd like to look at this next triangle over here. Again, we are looking at the sides this time. So we are looking at the line segments from this point to this point, this side, from here to here, this line segment, and from here to this end point, this line segment. Now I can already tell that that bottom line, this one's smaller than the other ones, but I'm kind of thinking those 2 other lines might be the same length. If I'm not sure, and I can't see it real well, I can check it. This is about 4.5, and that's about 4.5. So these 2 lines right here, these 2 line segments or sides are exactly the same length. They're exactly the same size. So this triangle has 2 equal sides. This side is the same length as this side. We call it a triangle that has 2 equal sides an isosceles triangle. Now the way I remember it has 2 is, you see the SOS in there? There's 2 S's right next to each other. Isosceles has 2 that are the same length. So far we've had a scalene, which none of the sides are the same, scalene. We have an isosceles, the SOS, it has 2 sides that are the same. And now let's look at this one over here. If I had to guess all 3 of those sides, and remember we're looking at the line segment from here to here, from here to here, and from here to here. We're looking at those line segments. I think all of those look like they might be the same length. I'm just going to check and see real fast. That's about 5, about 5. Yep, about 5. All 3 of those shapes, all 3 of those line segments are exactly the same length. They're all equal. So 3 equal sides means you have an equilateral triangle. Do you hear the word equal in there? Okay, so back to what we just talked about. You have a triangle that has no sides that are the same. That's a scalene. A triangle that has 2 sides that are the same. Isosceles. Now remember that's the one with 2 because it has the SOS, the 2 S's. And then you have the equilateral. All 3 sides are equal. Okay, now we've just talked about the way we can name a triangle. We need to figure out what kind of angle it has, what kind of sides it has, and its last name is triangle. Okay, I'm going to pull out a couple of triangles, some triangles that I made earlier today, and I want to see if we can give them all 3 names. So the last name is always going to be triangle. Let me get this first one out here and get a different marker so we can see. Let's see here. Okay, here's my first triangle. Now, when we start talking and naming this triangle, we're going to start with what kind of angles it has. Now let's take a look at this. I'm thinking that this angle and that one, those look pretty tiny. Those look like acute angles to me. Now this one, I want to check. I want to see if that's a right angle or not. Let's see. Oh, yep, it makes the perfect corner. So I have a right angle right here. That is a right angle. So the first name of this triangle is going to be right. It is a right angle. Okay, so we have a right angle to start with. Now, I want to talk about the sides. Let's look at the sides. This side, from this endpoint to this endpoint, was 4 inches. From here to here was 7. From here to here was 6. None of these sides are the same. So we have no equal length sides. This is going to be a scalene triangle. Okay, and our last name's triangle. So this shape right here is a right scalene triangle. Okay, let's try another one. This is also another shape that I made earlier today. Let's take a look at it. Okay, now I notice we're going to start with our angle first. Let me get this off here. Triangle is going to stay the last name. All right, let's look at it. I'm looking at these angles first. Let's look at all of our angles here. I don't see anything. This is pretty small. That does not look like a right angle to me. Nope, it's smaller, so it's an acute angle. And that one's smaller too. All 3 of those are acute angles. So if we have a triangle that has all acute angles, the first name is going to be acute. We have an acute triangle. Now let's look at the sides. I noticed that this side from here to here, this line segment was 4 inches. This side from here to here was 4 inches. So I have 2 sides that are the same. This was only 3.5 inches, so it's smaller. I have 2 sides that are the same. If you have a triangle that has 2 sides that are the same, it is the isosceles. I remember it's 2 because it has the ISOS, 2 S's right next to each other. All right, so we have, here's our name. This triangle is an acute isosceles because it has 2 equal sides triangle. Okay, let's try another one. I made this other one a little bit earlier today. Try another one here. Okay, now let's take a look at this shape. I see my triangle with the 3 different sides. A triangle with 3 angles in it. And let's start naming this triangle. Let's start with the angles first. Now I'm looking at this, and I can tell right away that this angle is going to be acute. It's pretty small. This one looks acute too. Oh, yeah, it's pretty small. Now, wait a minute. Let's see if that last one is acute. If it has 3 acute, it's an acute triangle. Let's see here. Wait a minute. Look at that. This is bigger than a right angle. So this angle is obtuse. We have an obtuse angle in here. If I have an obtuse angle anywhere, it's an obtuse triangle. So I have an obtuse angle triangle. Now let's look at the sides. I have a 7-inch side. This line segment is 7 inches. This line segment was only 5. This one's only 3. So I have 3 different lengths of line segment there. None of them are the same. None of them are equal. So if I have a triangle that has no equal sides, it is a scalene triangle. Okay. Now, the last name is always triangle. So this shape is an obtuse scalene triangle. Okay, let's try another one. Try naming another one. There's another one I made earlier today. All right. Now, take a look at this guy here. I'm going to start by looking at the angles first. These angles do not look big enough to me. Nope. To be right angles. That doesn't look like a right angle. This one doesn't either. None of these look like a right angle, and they're smaller, so they're not obtuse either. All 3 of these are acute angles. So if I have all acute angles, I'm going to call this shape an acute angle triangle. Now let's look at our sides. 4 inches from here to here. This line segment is 4 inches. This line segment is 4 inches. What kind of triangle do we have here, guys? Everything's equal. If you said equilateral, you are right. So let me get equilateral here. That's a lot of writing. Oh, big word there. Equilateral. Okay. So this shape is an acute equilateral triangle. Okay. Now, we've looked at all of those examples that we had from today. Now I think we are ready to go on and take a look at our paper today. Okay, I'm going to put my paper up here, and I'm going to come over and see if I can't make this a little bit bigger. See if we can figure this out. Okay.